There I was, sprawled out on the cold bathroom floor, my head spinning from an ulcer and gripping my side in pain. My wife stepped over me with an exaggerated eye roll and said, "If you're going to die, at least do it quietly. The neighbors already think you're pathetic." Her words stung as she flushed the toilet, walked out, and slammed the door behind her. Somehow, I managed to drag myself to the L on my own. Fast forward 2 months, and she expressed deep regret over what she had said. I never imagined I'd be the type to share my marriage troubles with strangers on Reddit, but here I am. After following along for some time, I'm finally ready to share my story. I'm a 31-year-old man, and my wife, Stephanie, is 29. We've been married for nearly 6 years. The beginning of our marriage wasn't terrible. In fact, the first 4 years were quite good. Sure, we had our disagreements like any other couple, but there were no major issues. Yet, now I see how things started to slip about 2 years ago. It was the little things at first, often comments, the occasional eye roll when I spoke, interrupting me mid-sentence, and those so-called jokes that were more hurtful than funny. I convinced myself it was just a rough patch, blaming the pressures of life for the change. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The economy's been a nightmare lately, and to top it off, our apartment building's management changed, only to land us with the worst slumlords imaginable. After a pipe burst next door, the basement developed a nasty black mold problem. Despite our pleas, the management company keeps forgetting to send someone to fix it properly. Yesterday, Stephanie mentioned that the basement's smell was unbearable, asking me to tackle the mold again. That's the 3rd time this month, by the way. Just regular husband duties, right? So, I grabbed my trusty mask and gloves from the closet, because that black mold is no joke, and headed down there with bleach and brushes in hand. Our building's basement feels straight out of a horror flick. Dim lighting, strange noises from the pipes, and a constant dampness that adds to the eerie vibe. Now, with the mold creeping up the walls like some alien life form, I found myself scrubbing for about an hour. Sweat soaked through my shirt in the humid air, even though it was only around 70 degrees outside. Then, in the middle of this sci-fi scene, my phone chimed with a text from Stephanie. "Don't forget to take out the trash when you're done, including yourself." I found myself frozen in place, sponge in hand, completely captivated by my phone screen. Was that supposed to be a joke? Sure, we often tease each other, but this felt different. It carried a strange undertone. I brushed it off, thinking she might be using sarcasm. After finishing my scrubbing, I took a quick shower and headed upstairs, curious and slightly apprehensive. As I entered the kitchen, where she lounged on the couch immersed in TikTok, I brought up her message, expecting we'd share a laugh about it. But she didn't even glance away from her phone, delivering her words with unsettling casualness. "You're not good for anything except getting dirty." Like a broken tool I haven't bothered to toss out. Her words were delivered with such a flat tone, void of emotion, as if she were merely stating a mundane observation about the day's weather. That hit harder than any heated argument, a matter of factness that stung. I was left speechless, my mind suddenly blank, scrambling for a response. All I managed to do was mumble an excuse about needing to check for something in the basement, avoiding the sharpness of her words, and seeking refuge in the solitude of another room. I headed back downstairs and ended up sitting on the basement steps for nearly 2 hours, lost in thought. I replayed our relationship in my mind, recalling all the subtle jabs and the countless times she'd made me feel insignificant. I used to dismiss these instances, convincing myself it was just her way of joking, or that she was simply stressed. When I eventually went back upstairs, she was already asleep in bed. I quietly fetched a blanket from the closet and returned to the basement. Maybe it was a bit petty, but I just couldn't bring myself to lie beside her. Instead, I curled up next to the water heater, the warmest spot I could find down there. Sleep eluded me. I spent most of the night scrolling through my phone, reviewing our finances and messages. And that's when I stumbled upon something surprising. Remember how I mentioned our finances were tight? Well, I discovered that Stephanie had been keeping some financial secrets. While we shared a joint account, I found out she'd opened a separate account nearly a year ago. She'd been quietly transferring small amounts, not enough to catch my eye during quick glances at our statements, but enough to accumulate nearly $7,000. Over time, I started to uncover a series of conversations between her and her friend Lindsay, where she confessed she was completely over me and just waiting for the right moment to talk. It was clear in messages dating back 3 months ago. By 5 a.m. that morning, I knew what I had to do. While she was still fast asleep, I made my move. I packed a bag, snapped screenshots of everything I'd found, and carefully transferred my latest paycheck out of our joint account, leaving enough to cover rent and bills. With that, I walked out quietly into the early morning light, calling my buddy Tristan, who kindly let me crash at his place for a while. I didn't tell anyone else where I was headed and even turned off my phone's location sharing. It was like I vanished into thin air. A few hours later, around 7:30 a.m., the text started pouring in. Her first message was at 7:34 a.m., asking, "Where are you?" It was quickly followed by more desperate inquiries. Knocks. "Hello," at 7:46 a.m., and by 8:12 a.m., she was clearly starting to panic, with "This isn't funny." "Where did you go?" showing up on my screen. By 8:34 a.m., frustration crept in, with her accusing me, "Are you seriously this childish? Crashing in the basement wasn't dramatic enough for you, huh?" 9:15 a.m., "I got a call from your boss saying you'd called in sick. Where on earth are you?" 10:23 a.m., "Please, I just want to know you're okay." 11:47 a.m., "I'm really sorry for what I said earlier. I was overwhelmed and stressed out. Please come home." I ignored all the messages, letting the words simmer in silence. By the afternoon, she was reaching out to my friends. Thankfully, most of them had my back and played it cool. She even called my mom, but luckily, Mom respected my wishes and didn't tell her anything beyond reassuring her that I was safe. It's been a full day now. I've talked to a lawyer online and am starting to lay down some plans. It feels like she's been orchestrating an escape plan for months, hoarding money and gradually drifting away emotionally. Being treated like garbage was no way to live. If I was considered trash, then I decided it was time to haul myself out and everything else with me. I meticulously gathered evidence of a separate bank account, cruel messages, and a pattern of emotional abuse. My lawyer's confident I've got a strong case for a favorable divorce settlement here. Just about an hour ago, she appeared at Tristan's doorstep. I have no idea how she tracked me down by elimination since I hadn't been answering her calls. She was in tears, her makeup a mess, pleading for me to come out and talk. I watched through the peephole as Tristan told her I was not there. An odd mix of emotions stirred within me. Was it pity? Regret? Yet, I recalled those days spent scrubbing moldy basement walls while she blithely texted me to take out the trash. How ironic that she started caring only when I actually decided to heed her advice. But this is just the beginning. The real cleanup starts now. Update. It's been 2 weeks since my last post. I spent 2 weeks maintaining radio silence with Stephanie. Not with everyone else, just Stephanie. Over those days, it started to dawn on her that calling her husband trash and a broken tool might actually have some real consequences. To start with, I left Tristan's place after just 3 days. Not because he wasn't a great host, was amazing and even gave up his own bedroom to sleep on the couch. The issue was Stephanie, who kept showing up. At first, it was just her, but soon she began bringing backup, her sister, her best friend Lindsay, and, for maximum awkwardness, even tried her mom. Let me just say, her mom has never been my biggest fan. So, I decided to disappear for a while. I found an Airbnb, paid in cash, and used a friend's account to book it. I went completely off the grid and only shared my location with trusted people. This was my chance to be a ghost, just for a bit. Let me tell you about a couple of key players in my story. Tristan and my brother, Albert. Albert really came through for me when I needed him the most. I'll get to that part soon. The day after my last update, I found myself in a video call with a divorce attorney. Armed with evidence of screenshots, bank statements, text messages, he watched as he reviewed everything. He remained calm, not even flinching, and assured me I had a strong case. He pointed out that emotional abuse leaves marks just like physical abuse does. They're just not as visible to everyone. Those words hit home for me. Meanwhile, Stephanie was bombarding my phone with a staggering 78 text messages in one day, her personal best. But amidst the chaos, I was making quiet yet impactful moves. I forwarded my mail to a new P.O. box, opened bank accounts at a different bank, rerouted my paycheck direct deposits, and even removed my name from our shared streaming services. It felt somewhat petty, but also incredibly satisfying. From that pivotal moment, I began to document everything meticulously. Revisiting old texts and emails with a fresh perspective felt like uncovering the truth behind our entire relationship. I began to see the subtle yet persistent put-downs, camouflaged as jokes. She'd spin stories to our friends that painted me as incompetent, and frequently forgot to pass along important messages or invitations intended for me. One particular message from last Christmas struck a nerve. I had spent hours precariously setting up holiday lights outside our apartment because she wanted them, despite my fear of heights. Her only comment was that our display looked like a dollar store knockoff compared to the neighbors. At the time, I laughed it off, but now that remark leaves a sour feeling in the pit of my stomach. The financial revelations were equally startling. Our money troubles became clear when I traced where funds had actually been flowing. That separate account I had mentioned was just the tip of the iceberg. Each discovery painted a fuller picture of underlying issues that I could no longer ignore. It turns out, the so-called savings were a facade. Stephanie had been splurging on all sorts of extravagances she swore we couldn't afford. Luxurious lunches, designer clothes, and those weekend getaways with Lindsay that she deceptively labeled as work conferences. 5 days into a self-imposed ghost mode, I finally broke my silence with a single text. My message was brief and to the point. From now on, all communication would go through my attorney. I shared his contact information and then blocked her everywhere except email, which I kept muted but active for documentation purposes. That's when things erupted. She showed up at my workplace twice, and security had to escort her out on her second visit. Then, she began reaching out to our mutual friends, spinning a narrative about her concerns for my mental health and supposed erratic behavior. It was a classic Darvo tactic where she denied, attacked, and reversed the roles of victim and offender. Astonishingly, some people even bought into her version of events. You won't believe what happened. Her mutual friend, Brody, actually reached out, concerned that I might be having a meltdown. That conversation was quite eye-opening about what was being said behind my back. Supposedly, she conveniently left out the part where she called me trash while I was busy scrubbing toxic mold out of our basement. Brody was just told that we had a minor argument, and apparently, I just lost it. But did she ever mention stashing $7,000 in a secret account without telling me? Brody was flabbergasted. What? No. Apparently it was just saving for a house. This kind of pattern kept happening with other friends. Each time, I calmly laid out my side of the story without exaggerating. No harsh words, just simple facts. Sometimes, I even had the screenshots to back me up. The change in their reactions was instantly noticeable. From concern for my well-being to shock at her behavior, everything shifted dramatically by the end of the first week. Stephanie's social media evolved from posts by a worried wife searching for her missing husband to angry tirades about men who can't communicate, eventually turning into tearful appeals for reconciliation. Initially, her comments section brimmed with support, but it quickly grew noticeably silent as people began piecing together the real story. Meanwhile, I was quietly rebuilding my life. I found a month-to-month apartment luxurious, just a humble studio with decent internet. I bought the essentials from a thrift store. Albert helped me move the few belongings I managed to grab from our place while Stephanie was at work. The space is sparse, but it's mine, Plus, it's free of black mold. Around the 10th day, financial realities started affecting her. I'd been shouldering about 70% of our expenses because she always claimed her job didn't pay enough. It turns out that was another lie. She actually earns nearly as much as I do. As if from nowhere, it seemed like every subscription service demanded payment all at once. The credit card statements piled in, each one a stark reminder of looming debts. And then there was the rent ever-approaching deadline casting a shadow. Her email started out simmering with discontent, but quickly boiled over into sheer panic. It was 10 days in. "You can't just walk away from our responsibilities," she wrote. "This is so immature." By day 12, the landlord was on the phone, asking about the rent. What should I tell him? The messages didn't stop. Day 13 brought a plea. "Please, let's talk. I can't handle everything on my own." I knew where I stood legally. My lawyer had made it clear. I was only obligated to cover a surprisingly small amount, since we had neither children nor shared property. So, I set up automatic payments for just that, not a cent more. Amidst all of this, I constantly recalled that moment in the basement, feeling of being tossed aside, a tool no longer useful, reduced to nothing more than trash. The moment that kept my resolve firm against the creeping tide of doubt came last weekend in the most unexpected way. We were at Jennifer's housewarming, a cozy gathering with maybe 15 of our closest friends. I went there hoping to find some distraction from all that had been going wrong, never expecting Stephanie to show up. I was engaged in light conversation with Jennifer's boyfriend when Stephanie walked through the door. The room didn't fall into silence, but there was a nearly audible collective gasp. An awkward energy buzzed in the air. Ariani was aware of the drama, yet we all tried to pretend it wasn't there. Stephanie looked worn out, like life's struggles weighed heavily upon her. Her hair was unwashed, shadows hung beneath her eyes, and she wore that old sweater she always disliked but never replaced. When our eyes met from across the room, a strange sensation of vertigo hit me, as if I was staring at a stranger wearing my wife's features. Suddenly, she broke down, not just with tears, but with great, heaving sobs that sent her mascara running and our hearts aching. Jennifer rushed over, trying to offer comfort, but Stephanie pushed her away. She pointed directly at me, her voice rising in accusation, declaring that I had ruined her life and abandoned her. The weight of her words and the raw emotion in her voice left the room cold, and in that moment, everything felt impossibly fragile. She turned everyone against me, painting me as cruel and calculating, claiming she no longer recognized who I was. And there I was, holding a cup of soda, watching someone I'd spent 6 years with come undone. You'd think I'd feel some things that is facty, anger, maybe even pity, but instead, I felt a numbing emptiness, like watching a raging storm from behind the safety of a window, untouched by the chaos. Eventually, Jennifer's boyfriend and another guy quietly guided her outside. I later heard she sat in her car for nearly an hour, lost in thought, before finally driving away. The party never regained its energy after that, and I found myself leaving early. That night, as I lay in bed in my new, echoingly empty apartment, I scrolled through old photos of us. Memories of joyful times, vacations. Our wedding, it was a tapestry of seemingly happy moments. I desperately tried to unearth some emotion, grief, longing, and anything. But all I saw was a ghost of someone who never truly existed. She had always been the person who could call me trash. I just refused to see it. Tomorrow, the divorce papers will be sent. My attorney assured me they'll arrive at her workplace. He said it would be better this way, less drama, fewer onlookers if things didn't go well. Just in case, I've temporarily distanced myself from most of our shared friends out of anger, but to make room for what's ahead. Yesterday, I noticed a little bit of mold on the bathroom ceiling. Instinctively, I scrubbed it off right away, flung open the windows, and cranked up the fan. Old habits die hard. This time, though, I'm committed to clearing out all the clutter for good. Here's my final update. It's been nearly 6 months since I last checked in, 6 months filled with courtroom visits and negotiations. In that time, I've been gingerly piecing together what feels like a brand new existence. Just yesterday, while digging through my cloud storage, I stumbled upon an old photo of Stephanie and me. What caught my attention wasn't the vacation smiles or the beautiful scenery. It was how different I appeared in it, just younger, but somehow dimmed. It was as if my inner light had been dialed down to the faintest glow. I barely recognized that version of myself. Finally, last week, the divorce became official. A strangely significant event like buying a new house can feel life-changing. Yet all it really requires is a stack of paperwork and a judge's signature. You expect to be overwhelmed by a monumental sense of achievement, but there I was, eating a lackluster sandwich at the deli across the street from the courthouse. Before heading back to work as if nothing had happened, let's rewind a bit to when everything started unraveling. After Stephanie was served the divorce papers, things escalated quickly from bad to catastrophic. In no time, she was telling anyone who'd listen that I was having a mental breakdown, probably cheating, definitely abusive, and essentially the devil in disguise of throwing everything, including the proverbial kitchen sink, into her character assassination campaign. But she underestimated me. I had evidence of screenshots from over 6 years. Each time someone reached out to me about her latest outrageous claim, I simply shared the relevant screenshots, her calling me garbage, her hidden bank statements, her text to Lindsay about being over all of this without a single word of commentary, just cold hard facts. By the 3rd week, she had exhausted most of her social capital, and her once formidable walls began to crumble under the weight of her own fabrications. Even Lindsay, her best friend since college, began to pull away when I accidentally shared a thread of messages where Stephanie had cruelly referred to Lindsay's boyfriend as a budget store Ryan Reynolds, only uglier. It was a real jab, and the fallout was immediate. The bizarre nature of my situation really hit home when we found ourselves in our first mediation session. My lawyer had advised me to be sensible, divide things fairly, keep it straightforward, and wrap things up quickly. But Stephanie walked in with a list of demands so outrageous that even the mediator did a double take. She wanted alimony after a mere 6-year marriage without children, our rented apartment, the car I had purchased before we even met, and half of my retirement savings despite concealing her own nest egg. When the mediator probed about the separate account she'd been maintaining, she hesitated and then stumbled out an excuse that it was earmarked for a future anniversary getaway. At that moment, my lawyer calmly slid over printed conversations showing her real plans for that money, leaving Stephanie speechless and the room thick with tension. After the curtain fell on our shared life, she broke down in tears. Not the kind of tears I witnessed at Jennifer's party, designed to pull the strings of sympathy. These were raw, unfiltered tears. For a moment, I was tempted to reach out and offer comfort, a reflex born from 6 years of habit. But as she glanced up, I recognized the familiar calculation in her eyes, sizing me up to see if her old tricks still had any power. They didn't. 2 months later, the settlement was finalized. Assets were split evenly with no alimony on the table. I managed to secure my retirement funds by uncovering the truth about her financial deceit, while she held onto her secret account. We divided the furniture and went our separate ways. As she departed, I began the process of piecing my life back together. I found a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood, a fresh start waiting to unfold. It's not extravagant, but it has these enormous windows that let in so much light, and thankfully, no worries about mold. I've started therapy, and honestly, it's been transformative thanks to BetterHelp. Having sessions in my car during my lunch break truly changed the game for me. I've reconnected with friends I drifted away from during my marriage, and those little triumphs have become part of my everyday life. I've been cooking real meals instead of relying on microwave dinners, and I even started buying plant sand. Here's the kicker: I'm keeping them alive. I'm setting up my space exactly the way I want it, enjoying the luxury of hot showers without anyone grumbling, and letting dishes sit in the sink overnight because, let's face it, Sometimes you're just a beat. Work has been a bit of a roller coaster. I've had to use more personal days than I'd like because of court stuff, leading to some pretty awkward talks with my boss. On the bright side, I scored a small promotion last month. It's not a monumental change, but it gives me a little more financial breathing room. The social aftermath has been the strangest part. Friendships splintered into rival factions Team Knox and Team Stephanie while a few brave souls attempted to stay neutral. Holidays became painfully awkward. At Tristan's Thanksgiving, everyone tiptoed around the topic, but their silence only made her absence more palpable. Throughout this ordeal, my brother Albert has been my unwavering support. He was the only one who, years ago, bluntly warned me that Stephanie was trouble, advice I foolishly ignored. 3 months after moving out, I decided to dip my toes back into the dating world. I downloaded the apps, set up profile less the whole discouraging carousel. I went on a few coffee dates that led nowhere. One connection seemed promising, but had fizzled out after thus 3 dates, leaving me wondering if I was the common denominator in this string of dead ends. I first met Abigail during a laid-back board game night, hosted by a friend. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, centered around our mutual love for hilariously bad movies and her tales of teaching high school art. There were no dramatic sparks or movie-like moments, just a comforting, genuine connection. It's been around 2 months since we began seeing each other, taking things one step at a time. Abigail is familiar with the basics of the whole Stephanie saga, but hasn't been scared off yet, which I take as a good sign. The drama with Stephanie reached its climax last month. I was at the grocery store on a typical Sunday morning, headphones in, meticulously comparing cereal prices like the newly thrifty bachelor I've become. That's when I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned around and saw Stephanie. She looked far from her usual self in a satisfying, triumphant kind of way, but rather just deeply unwell. Her hair was thrown up in a messy bun, and she wore what I could only describe as her I've given up sweats. Dark circles clung beneath her eyes, and her shopping cart was filled with nothing but frozen dinners, wine, and cat food. The irony was, we never even owned a cat. When her eyes met mine, she froze in place. We stood there, locked in a silent stare-off between the Cheerios and the generic cereal boxes, a full 30 seconds ticking by like an eternity. Suddenly, abandoning her cart, she walked directly over to me. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Beginning with an accusation, she asked why I had to ruin everything. Then came the bargaining. She pleaded that we could still make things right if only I would talk to her. And then came a confession that hit me like a bolt from the blue. She admitted that she had been emotionally involved with a guy from her office. For 2 years, she assured me, it had been nothing physical. Yet, they had shared an emotional bond that ran deep. The whole years. Just when things were shifting between us, she claimed she'd called it off when I left, realizing the impact of her actions and how poorly she had treated me. She explained the harsh words she had used were her way of pushing me away out of guilt, punishing me for her own shortcomings. I found myself frozen in disbelief, clutching a box of generic frosted flakes in the aisle, struggling to digest what she was revealing. A part of me felt an urge to laugh at the absurdity, another part wanted to scream out in frustration, but mostly, I just wished I could finish shopping and escape to the solace of home. I finally mustered the courage to ask why she was choosing to tell me all of this now that everything seemed to have settled. Her response felt like a punch to the gut. She had seen Abigail and me together at the movies just last week, and that encounter had stirred something within her. It hit me like a revelatione was genuinely moving on. I glanced at my reflection and realized I looked truly happy, happier than I ever was with her. I hadn't even noticed her presence until that moment. I approached her, apologized for how things ended, and expressed my hope that she would find peace. Then, I casually tossed a box of cereal into my cart and started to walk away. Her voice, raw and trembling, echoed behind me, asking if that was genuinely all I had to say after 6 long years together. I turned around one last time and said with firm clarity, You called me trash. So I took myself out. It was the best decision I ever made. That was 3 weeks ago. And since then, I've heard nothing from her. Yesterday, I officially signed a 1-year lease on my own apartment. For the first time since moving in, I hung photos on the walls. It's the little things that make a place feel like home. Abigail came over to lend a hand, teasing me about my hopeless inability to hang anything straight. We ordered pizza and indulged in a delightfully awful sci-fi movie, laughing until our sides hurt. It's moments like these that remind me how far I've come. I drifted off on the couch last night. This morning, the early light nudged me awake, and I treated myself to a fresh cup of coffee. As I stood by the window, watching the sun paint the sky, I felt a surprising sense of peace that I hadn't expected to experience again so soon. I'm not naive enough to think the chapter with Stephanie is completely closed. Life rarely ties things up that neatly, but I no longer find myself on the edge, waiting for the next jab or emotional blow. There's a newfound calm in knowing that taking out the trash sometimes means removing yourself from toxic situations. It means honoring your own value and leaving behind those who fail to see it. Exactly a year after that tumultuous incident in the basement, I bumped into Lindsay at a coffee shop. She mentioned that Stephanie had moved back to her hometown last month because living in the same city as me proved painful. In that moment, I hope she finds what she needs not for her benefit, but for whoever comes after me. Some cycles are meant to be broken,